Good day, folks. This is Mark Anthony Williams with yet another episode of So You Want to Be a Safety Professional. And we have an exciting episode for you guys today. With me today is Mary Jane, who is an investigator from SafetyWise. SafetyWise is an Australian-based company with a global presence in the incident investigation and training space. They are the global leaders in ICAM, a system of incident investigation processes. They have a team of seasoned consultants that span all across a variety of continents. So today we have someone who's going to talk to us about our topic, from accident to insight, effective methods on incident investigation. Mary Jane, how are you doing today?
Good, thank you, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So our first question is, how should organizations foster a culture that encourages transparent and unbiased incident reporting and investigation without fear of reprisal or blame?
Well, before I fully answer the question, let's just go through the importance of having a good reporting culture. And honestly, it is one of the biggest barriers to effective reporting and investigation. A good reporting culture is one that's going to encourage your reporting, as you've implied here, without fear of blame or reprisal. And it uses the information from those reports to improve overall safety performance as well as organizational learning. So if a culture like this doesn't exist in an organization, then essentially we're building a workforce who either underreport or worse, don't report at all.
Oh gosh.
Which means that we've missed a significant opportunity for learning, right? Particularly when we're looking at high potential events or near misses. We essentially had an opportunity to learn without there actually being a significant actual consequence from that event.
Right.
So if these events are not being reported for whatever reason, we unfortunately only learn after we've had a major incident where someone has either been seriously hurt or worse. So coming back to your question, how do we foster this? One of the most important things is to encourage reporting by making it a positive, recognized action and experience. There are going to be multiple ways we can do that. Some organizations incentivize it. Others have specific targets that need to be met.
Okay.
But the key is not focusing solely on metrics like, your total recordable injury rates or frequency rates, which are focusing on the negative outcomes of the reporting.
And those are just lagging indicators anyway. They always come after the fact.
Exactly. We're tracking the outputs instead of the inputs. The second thing I would say is that, having a robust systemic investigation process that takes a holistic approach to an investigation is critical.
Okay.
Because through these processes, we identify human error, but we don't only focus on human error. Right? We're able to, through these kinds of processes, we're able to put human error in context by understanding the reasons behind the errors. We don't operate in a vacuum. We are influenced by everything that's going on around us. So a systemic process like ICAM will assist in identifying conditions that influence decisions. And
that makes sense.
I'm sure you know that these conditions are typically the result of your organizational practices, the decisions, and the processes that are or are not in place.
So set people up for success, right?
Right, exactly. So the process shouldn't focus on apportioning blame and liability. And if we can consistently demonstrate that through our investigations, that we are taking a holistic approach, then we gain the trust of the workforce. And a trusting workforce will report and they will engage in more incident investigations.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, a lot of times I feel like, we put employees in a bit of a bind, right? Like it's almost like a rock and a hard place, damned if you do, damned if you don't. If I report it, there's a consequence that's going to negatively affect me. If I don't report it and it gets caught, I'm still in trouble, right?
Exactly.
So it's almost like we focus too much on employee culpability versus actually system design and continuous improvement.
That's
and
100%.
I think the accountability piece of, hey, who can we blame should be the very last thing you're thinking about, so much as, what is the contributing factors? Where did we go wrong as an organization with our system, our environment? that cause this employee to make these decisions, right? To have these judgment calls.
Right. And, you use the word accountability, and it's important for us as investigators and safety professionals to understand that there is a separation here. A systemic investigation, a safety investigation, focuses on the system and the processes.
Right.
It's not an HR investigation. So we aren't looking at culpability, right?
Yep.
That needs to be a separate process after your investigation is complete. The organization must have some kind of fair and just culture process to post-investigation identify culpability and type of performance management that is appropriate. Two very separate systems. And if we don't keep them separate, then again, you lose the trust of the workforce, because we said that we weren't going to apportion blame or liability, but hey, at the end of my report, somebody's getting disciplined.
That's a fair point. So now there's almost a conflict of interest there, right? And you lose that trust because the transparency is almost shot.
Exactly.
How do modern technologies such as data analytics and VR, virtual simulations, how do they play a role in enhancing the accuracy and efficiency of incident investigations?
Well, if we think about virtual simulations, desktop investigations, these provide a lot of value and a lot of opportunity for investigators to use the skills that they have, which are skills that they typically don't use very often. So the saying, if you don't use it, you lose it. So these kinds of processes or opportunities allow us to practice and hone in on some of those skills in a safe environment where if you get it wrong, there's no negative consequence, right?
That's true. Right.
So a very important part of the learning piece and getting better at doing investigations, because if you're only doing them once every couple of months, you're never really going to get good at those skills.
Exactly.
When we do investigations, obviously we're typically focusing on the acute incident, right? Something went wrong. We investigate this. We look at this incident at this time during or under these conditions.
Right.
And using a systemic process like ICAM, we actually use data to trend contributing factors and organizational failures. We use a discrete set of contributing factor codes. And so what this enables an organization to do is to actually go back and track the number of times a code is used over a historical series of investigations.
So it categorizes it almost automatically in a sense.
Right. So we have 16 organizational factor types, for example, and these have been developed over many, many years based off of industry feedback. And so these codes, although fairly generic, they can be applied in many different industries and different organizations. They are the same contributing factors that we tend to see regardless of the industry or the organization.
Okay.
So data warehousing of this type then allows an in-depth analysis of how often a particular code, the same code, for example, is used across a series of seemingly disparate incident types.
Right.
So you identify repeated codes, even though it's not the same incident that's occurring. So you can see emerging trends in organizational decisions, practices, controls that are failing repeatedly in your business.
How did you guys come up with these codes?
There was an industry, a Shell put together a research team in the late 70s, I think it was, 70s or 80s, don't quote me on that, where following the Piper Alpha incident, they put together a group of individuals to investigate a number of catastrophic events in different industries. Okay. And they identified that there were these, they called them GFs, generic failure types. There was, in those incidents, they identified very similar root causes to those events, even though they were completely different. And those 10 generic failure types have now been expanded on over the years to these 16 organizational factor types that we use in ICAM.
I see. Okay, cool. It sounds very detail-oriented and very systematic.
Yeah, I mean, it's helpful because... it's helpful because it allows the organization to respond on a really broad basis, right? Looking at how and why it's repeatedly failed to
Right.
address an issue that's coming up.
And there's so many diverse challenges I can imagine come up in incident investigation. What are some of the challenges that you see are commonly faced during incident investigations? And how can we, I guess, investigate or prepare or overcome these obstacles?
Where do I start?
Oh, boy. All right. This is the
Um,
doozy. Okay.
Look, I mean, the biggest thing for me is, and when we talk with others in industry, you know, I'm currently training a group of people here in Canada, and the biggest thing that always comes up is the time pressure associated with investigation.
Okay.
Right? There's time pressure to start it. There's
Mm-hmm.
time pressure to complete it. There's time pressure on your data gathering because of obvious issues like the longer you wait, the more people forget, or the more opportunity there is for collaboration or contamination of data or loss of data.
Okay.
There's often, and you've probably heard this too in your career, is there's often a focus, a historical focus on identifying one key root cause to the event.
Right. As
Right?
in it all just started off as just one thing instead of realizing, no, it can be almost like a paradox. It could be multiple contributing factors. A
It
perfect storm
usually
even.
is. Exactly. It usually is. The notion of one root cause is somewhat of a fallacy, and most modern investigation processes do not focus on a key root cause to an event.
I see.
And the problem here is when you focus on a key root cause, typically we focus on the human error, identifying who did what wrong, we discipline them, problem solved, business as usual. Have we really solved the problem?
Right. What were the underlying factors that we missed?
Exactly. There's bias in investigations. People make assumptions and conclusions based on what they think happened. We are all human. As I said earlier, we don't operate in a vacuum. So even as investigators, we are influenced by what goes on around us, by our own experience, by our own training, what we've been exposed to over the years.
So there's an inherent bias there.
Yeah, there's an inherent bias. You know, there's issues with access to adequate data. And, you know, coming back to the conversation we had right at the start,
Mm-hmm.
often a big challenge is worker willingness to participate in these activities.
That's fair.
Because historically, it comes down to blame. So, you know, what have I mentioned? 5 or 6 things there, and they're probably all interlinked, right?
Yeah.
But essentially, you know, if you can provide some clear guideline on when an investigation is required, what type of investigation is required, we typically split so that you can use your resources and your time a little bit more effectively.
Okay.
You know, if you have a team-based approach, you're able to reduce a lot of that bias, right? You can be a bit more objective. Your team is going to comprise of, hopefully, subject matter experts
from each arena.
Exactly. Select personnel, someone completely independent, someone who has no vested interest in the outcome of the investigation.
Right. So there's no conflict of interest there.
Yeah, your early assumptions and conclusions, again, following a tried and established approach that keeps you focused on fact, is obviously going to be exceptionally beneficial. And I'll come back to a really simple process that we use in ICAM. We use a data gathering technique called PEOPO. I'm not sure if you heard of it. People, environment, equipment, procedures, and organization.
Okay.
And we use this data gathering technique for brainstorming and planning of your data gathering phase, right? Proper prior planning prevents poor performance. Take a step back. What am I dealing with? What do I need to know? What do I want to know? And we use that PEOPO as a guide. It becomes like a checklist for effective data gathering.
Okay.
So when you start your investigation, you're starting really broad. You're throwing a net out there, and it allows for that really, really broad approach so that we don't have tunnel vision early on, which is often what happens.
That's fair. So you're more likely to catch all of the contributing factors and assess almost everything that could have possibly been a variable in this happening versus just going in like a narrow tunnel to begin with.
Yes, and if you think of the acronym itself, PEOPO, yes, we are looking at people. It's important to look at who did what, right? They trigger the events most of the time, but we're also looking at how did the environment contribute? How did the equipment contribute? What procedures were available and how did they influence behavior? What were the organizational decisions around incentivizing, planning, scheduling, and resourcing of work?
Yeah, I can agree with that. That
Yeah.
totally makes sense. I mean, it's not just 5 whys, but it's 5 hows. I want to know what made you make this decision. I don't want to just determine that you made the decision, right?
Right.
It goes beyond that, because I put somebody else in your shoes under the same environment. They may make the very same decision, which means that they're also at risk. They're also creating the same hazards, and probably not intentionally. They're just trying to do their job and work hard.
Yeah.
How can incident investigation lead to not only identifying root causes or contributing factors, but also developing actionable insights for future prevention and safety improvements? What have you seen?
Well, okay. So, I mean, obviously, incident investigations are typically reactive. Something went wrong. It's an unwanted event. We investigate by looking backwards to identify, as you've mentioned, not only what happened, but why it happened, so we can implement controls to prevent it happening again.
Right.
But essentially, this is a proactive process, because we take the learnings from that and we can apply it to other areas of our business, right? To be proactive in how we address other issues as they emerge.
Right.
You know, a perfect example of this is high potential incident investigation. You've got proactive application of the outcomes for prevention and improved performance, where essentially it's a freebie, eh? We didn't hurt anyone. We didn't result in any kind of serious injury or serious equipment damage. We have an opportunity to investigate it, right? And apply those learnings again for future prevention.
Oh, I see. You didn't have to pay the cost of failure to learn the lesson.
Exactly.
You have to learn the lesson without actually. That's true.
That's why I'm referring to it as a freebie. We were lucky that time.
Right. But why not utilize that? Why not take advantage of it?
Right. And this is probably going to sound quite bizarre, and this is something that I talk a lot about with people that I work with. We're starting to see a change in industry to be a little bit more proactive, but we can and we should be using these processes to investigate positive outcomes. Do you know what I mean?
Elaborate on that a little bit more for me.
So when we have a desired positive outcome or a positive result, we plan for something and it goes according to plan. Right. For example, we complete a critical repair on a key component in a shorter time frame than we had initially expected or planned. Typically, this work takes us 6 hours, but today it took us 4.
You're right. Yep.
And as an organization, we are usually really good at recognizing that positive outcome with positive recognition.
Okay, I see.
But the question we should be asking is how? How did we achieve that?
Because if we I guess assess that, we can maybe repeat that positive behavior that led to that positive outcome.
Because you don't know what you don't know. So how do you know that we achieved that positive outcome? Through following all the correct controls, having all the procedures, following the procedures, having all the correct tools available and used correctly. Did we have favorable conditions? We don't know that. At this point, was it luck that got us here? Or are we actually doing the right things to get the right outcome?
Okay. It's almost like a hypothesis.
Right.
Is this just a chance? Does this just happen like a lightning strike? Or did we actually rub some rubber together and create static?
Yeah, you're using your investigation processes very proactively because you're using it as a risk management tool, not an investigation tool.
That makes perfect sense to me. Yeah.
We're proactively identifying those gaps, right? And if we can proactively identify gaps, we can put those controls in place. So as you mentioned, the next time you do the same activity, not only now do you have confidence that you will have efficient task completion, but you have a hell of a lot more confidence that you're going to do it safely too.
You know, I often think that, when you have data, it helps you make informed decisions. And from those informed decisions, it gives you a certain level of confidence in what's being done and the amount of risk, right?
Yeah.
I think that when you do put these mechanisms in place, it does kind of help you to establish, okay, how risky is something truly, and how can I mitigate those risks?
Yeah.
My final question, and this has been a great conversation so far. Wow. What ethical considerations must be kept in mind during an incident investigation, particularly when dealing with sensitive information or potential legal implications? And especially right here in the US, we're a very litigative society. Right? We're always thinking about that liability where's that liability going to fall? We think about it for insurance, we think about it for negligence, we think about it for just pure, hey, who was at fault here?
Yeah.
Essentially, there can't be a claim if nobody was at fault in most cases, right?
Right. And the two are very different, right? In the question, we're talking about how do we deal with sensitive information, and then what about the potential legal implications? So, I mean, regardless of the type of investigation that's being done, there's going to be sensitive information that is uncovered.
Okay.
So essentially, every investigation should be confidential, right? And that information should be securely stored. Access should be controlled. Access should only be as necessary by a select few in your investigation team. But there are a couple of other ethical considerations that I want to mention, and one of them is integrity and honesty. Do what you say you're going to do, be transparent and be neutral. You've used the word a couple of times today too. Like, transparency is key. People want to be able to trust you, and they want to be able to trust the system.
Correct.
We need to be neutral, which is really hard. We spoke about it earlier.
Yeah.
We have our own innate biases. We have our own perceptions and assumptions about, how things have happened. So the key is coming back to that fact-based evidence, validated through multiple credible and reliable sources. This leads us back to the objectivity piece. No speculation, no assumption, no opinion. Be aware of personal feelings and relationships. And again, a multidisciplinary team-based approach will assist with addressing some of that.
I'd even think about how you spoke about separating HR from the safety portion, right? In doing that, I think you even create a greater level of objectivity, because now you're not necessarily just trying to protect the company from liability. You're trying to do the right thing, regardless of who was at fault, if it was a systematic issue, if it was just employee misconduct issue, right? I think that's a level of transparency there by having that separation too.
And I think, Mark, sometimes we get lost in what we're doing, and we forget that these events involve our people, and there's trauma and there's stress, and it's real for many people, particularly in those significant events. And one thing we tend to brush over a little bit is taking care of the people who were directly involved, the witnesses who may have been present, and other personnel in the business who may have been affected first. Before you start your investigation, ensuring that you have access to something like an EAP, an employee assistance program, where we can offer some kind of counseling before interviewing. Because at the end of the day, it's employee safety and mental health first,
right,
before anything else.
That's a fair point. Treat the people involved, the affected parties first, before you start thinking about, well, I need to collect all this info, and I need to do this investigation, and I'm trying to figure out who to blame, who's at fault, who did something wrong. I think you're very right. There's a human element there.
Yeah, right? And it doesn't need to stagnate your process, right? There are other ways to gather information than through witness interviewing. So if people need to have that counseling made available, whilst that's ongoing, you can still be doing a lot of data gathering and analysis, and then you come back as needed to fill in gaps as needed.
That makes perfect sense to me. What words of advice would you give for safety professionals who are listening right now, who maybe want to sharpen their incident investigation skills? What should they focus on?
For me, it comes back to following an established process.
Okay.
There are many processes out there. Obviously, I'm biased towards ICAM because that's the process that I use, but there are many investigation processes, and ensuring that you have a robust, comprehensive, well-structured process is going to assist with everything that we have discussed today. It's going to give you that guidance and the tools, the information that you need to progress through a quality investigation.
That makes sense.
My final comment is that this is all fine and well. You can be a great investigator, but if you don't have a governance process to oversee all of this, it falls flat pretty quickly. Your Your senior managers in an organization need to understand their accountability for these processes too. They must have knowledge and understanding of the process, but more importantly, they need to ensure that they can resource and support the investigation and the investigators.
I see. Okay. That makes perfect sense. And in order to do that, you're going to need established processes.
Exactly.
That's easy to learn, easy to digest, so you can multiply the leadership in a sense, right? If it's too cumbersome, it's not very consistent, it's not well organized, it's hard for two people to do the same thing.
Exactly. A standardized approach is going to allow teamwork because everybody's on the same page. It allows us to communicate because we all speak the same language. It allows us to quality review because we have a tested process that we can work through. Have we asked all the right questions? Did we follow logic in getting to where we've come out? Do we have confidence in those results? Is it repeatable? And it allows us as a business to continuously improve those processes.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you so much for coming on with us today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
We may need to have you back again in season 2. Folks, I hope you guys are listening. I hope you enjoyed our session today talking about incident investigation. There were a lot of golden nuggets from MJ. ICAM is a great system. It's just one of many systems available. The point we're trying to make is you need to have something that's repeatable, standardized, easy to learn, has a high caliber, and allows objectivity and thoroughness, right, in its approach. If you have any questions, you can reach out to Mary Jane from SafetyWise. Her information is going to be in the description for this episode, right? Her email. So if you need some help, you need some advice, or you want to try ICAM out, feel free to give her a shout, and she'll reach out to you and provide some assistance for your company. Okay, this has been Mark Anthony with So You Want to Be a Safety Professional. Thank you for watching and be safe.